Political Capital is brought to you by Uber Canada. Learn how Uber and Mad Canada are reducing impaired driving at uber.com/home soon.
CHEK Podcasts.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Political Capital, your source for all the latest in BC politics. I'm your host, Rob Shaw, coming to you from the CHEK News World Headquarters in Victoria, where all the hipsters using bike lanes to get to their yoga classes are about as far away as humanly possible from oil pipelines, which is perhaps part of the political problem we're going to discuss today. The BC government faces on that issue. Plus, is the government addicted to high-priced special advisors? We will talk about that with some new developments on the special advisor front with the panel. You know them, you love them each and every week. Jeff Ferrier, Jillian Oliver, and Allie Blades, thank you for being here. Okay, pipeline politics again. This week we had Canada's premiers meeting with the Prime Minister, Mark Carney, in Saskatoon, part of this long-awaited sit-down, very rare face-to-faces between the premiers and the Prime Minister under the last Prime Minister. Now they're talking about national economic projects. The Prime Minister introducing legislation Friday to fast-track projects deemed in the national interest. And then everyone starts talking pipelines. Are pipelines in the national interest? Should we get one from Alberta through BC? What does BC think about that? Is Ottawa going to force it? And we start talking very quickly about the difficulties of that. Allie, so why don't we start with you? The Premier, David Eby, was not at the meeting. Nikki Sharma went. They have both basically said the same thing. There's no proponent on the books for an oil pipeline. Therefore, all of this is hypothetical. We'll cross the bridge when we get to it. We don't need to be talking about oil pipelines, even though other premiers and the Prime Minister appear to be doing just that. What do you make of that dynamic there?
Well, let's start with why we're talking about it. We're talking about it because since Donald Trump became president and started to impose tariffs and put us under economic threat, there's been a lot of conversation about building east to west versus north to south. And so these are big projects that are in the realm of economic prosperity. And so that's why it continues to come up. Point is, it's important. What happened this week, though, was Nikki Sharma looked into a camera and said, these are all hypotheticals. And so we're not really going to talk about it. And what I thought was that this was a huge missed opportunity. Think about this. This could have been an opportunity to say, we're open for business, that we're open to having the conversation, and that you should start investing in this province. But the NDP government continues to do this, where they say, no, we're going to put and punt the political issues to Ottawa, and by not getting involved in these harsh conversations. But when it comes to something like fluffy and great, they take all the credit for it. And that's just, and I think that this is just closing the doors. But it seems odd, though, and a little bit of a divide between the NDP caucus, because, you know, Bill 15 and what David Eby is currently doing on his Asia trip is exactly that. It's trying to bring in investment to this province. But his spokesperson at this conference is saying, actually, no, we'd rather not.
Mm-hmm. Jeff, I was going to go to Jillian next, but I can see you chomping at the bit there to jump in on this. Square the circle for us between David Eby talking about national projects, the country needing to come together to respond to the U.S., and then when one of the projects is pipelines, seeming to say, we don't really want to talk about that. We're not super interested in that.
I find it passing strange that the parties who said Bill 15, the speed up projects legislation, was an affront to local democracy, an affront to legislators, an affront to First Nations, are asking the government to prioritize and fast track non-existent pipelines from Alberta to British Columbia. I think the government is taking a responsible position here. They got some unfortunate headlines about saying no to pipelines. That's not what they actually did. They said, let's see some real projects so we can submit it to real review by the province and environmental regulators and for consideration as a priority project. That strikes me as responsible in two ways. One, the last thing British Columbia wants to do is to establish itself as an enemy of Alberta, so that they become like this cudgel that Premier Smith uses to make the case for a pipeline's absent an actual pipeline. Secondarily, think about buying a house. Someone comes to you and says, buy the house. And then you're like, well, I'd like to know that a house exists. And they say, well, there's no house that exists. And then you say, well, we should talk about price. We should talk about neighborhood. We get a home inspection and make sure it's up to snuff. And they're just like, no, just buy the house. So that's what BC is being asked to do with this pipeline. Let's wait to actually get an actual project. And then the province will, as it should, have a look at it and make determinations whether it's in the provincial and national interest.
It is it's like deja vu on this conversation, though. I think we talked more in the past about the chicken and egg argument here. Like, which comes first? The governments need to say they're interested in an oil pipeline, encourage investment, tell proponents that they're not going to take a long time to do it, that you're not going to face protests and opposition from governments before you actually get an actual proponent to do it? Or do you wait until a proponent just throws caution to the wind, jumps in and says, I'll spend billions and billions of dollars for something I don't even know whether I can get through? I'm trying to figure out, I think the first way is the way we're supposed to do it, to say we want it and we're willing to work with someone on it, and then the proponent appears. But I don't know, Jillian, what do you think of that chicken and egg?
Well, I think on an oil pipeline specifically that's coming through BC, the issue, and Premier Smith is talking about a specific pipeline, which is the Northern Gateway pipeline, was previously proposed to go through northern BC. That ended up getting squashed because of the risk of an oil spill on the North Coast. And so I think having a specific project articulated in mind so that the province that is taking on the risk of that project makes sense, because you need to be able to assess the risk and weigh the costs and benefits. So, I think saying that you don't have an ideological opposition to it is one thing. Saying that you're just going to accept any project regardless of the risk without knowing what those risks are, I think is irresponsible. So maybe it's kind of a bit of both. In that case, I think, I kind of fall I take kind of what both Allie and Jeff said. I think that the government's issue is that they are not talking enough about what they're for. They did approve a pipeline or advance a LNG pipeline last week, but we've talked about this before. They didn't do it with much fanfare because they kind of want to have their cake and eat it too on the LNG issue. They're moving ahead without, but they don't want to, publicize that they're doing that because they're kind of worried about the blowback and they want to maintain environmentalist cred at the same time. They talk about shovel-ready projects, but that's so vague. I think that they could buy themselves a lot more credit with the public, and also, to kind of combat this narrative that Alberta is kind of trying to propagate, that BC is kind of standing in the way, by talking more about specifically what they're for. And I don't know why they haven't been able to articulate that. I think that would have helped them with Bill 15 as well, instead of being so vague, because it kind of seems like a little bit shady or that they don't really have a plan. And I think that's kind of part of the problem for them here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Jeff, back to you on that point. If Bill 15 was supposed to fast-track projects, and now we see the Prime Minister talking about his legislation to fast-track projects, and then all the provinces submit their own little projects, but none of them want to do things that other provinces want to do because it might not be what they want to do. Are we any further ahead as a country?
Well, I think the Prime Minister needs to balance regional interests in the allocation of resources to major projects. I think I would expect every province to step forward and, with a long list of priorities, projects that would bring economic development, jobs to the province that they represent. And, the Prime Minister is going to choose from those lists, probably the ones that he can move on most quickly and show an impact. I think Jillian's right when she talks about the government not talking about what it's for. I heard some post-premiers interviews with some MLAs, and it almost sounded like they felt guilty for Bill 7, Bill 14, Bill 15, talked an awful lot about the criticism, and that's about it. You want to see from a government, and I think they've taken strong steps here, and I've articulated that on past shows. You start off by saying, Our focus is a strong economy for people and communities, and that's why we're picking these projects to advance to the front of the line, because that's going to create jobs and prosperity. And this is our approach, and this is our plan. And you hear it from the Premier, but you need to hear it more strongly, in my view, from the rest of government.
Mm-hmm. Allie, let's close with you on this topic. Like, the Prime Minister is saying he's not going to force any provinces to take projects they don't want. Is that the right line for the Prime Minister to take? And does it solve any of the many issues our country has with a bunch of separate provinces wanting separate things and not necessarily always working in the national interest at a time when that's what we're talking about doing?
I think that line is really going to evolve when he has a differing of opinions, and then the adult in the room needs to step up, because the worst case scenario is that we have another situation where the taxpayer own another pipeline because of the lack of intervention from government. And so that's a very optimistic line to say. I think he's going to have to, and Ottawa and the Prime Minister's office is really going to have to come in and say, this is what we need to do because it's in the best interest of the entire country, which has really started a number of conversations when we talk about, protecting our coastline, because that's what the stance of the NDP government seems to be, is that this is our coastline. Well, it's Canadians' coastline.
I want to move on to the next topic here, which is the BC government has hired yet another special advisor. Former Environment Minister George Heyman tapped as the special advisor on public sector negotiations, try and help the government ink some deals with all the teachers, nurses, doctors, government employees whose contracts are up right now. Of course, government didn't tell us that it had hired Heyman to a $58,000 four-month contract. In April, the opposition found out when Heyman updated his LinkedIn account. This is, I think, the sixth or seventh special advisor the government and the Premier has hired. Jillian, what's going on here? Why does this keep happening, do you think? And is it good? Is it a good idea?
I mean, I think it really depends on, there's nothing wrong with a well-chosen consultant who can deliver on a government priority where you feel like, the cabinet can't fully meet the requirements. And I think in this case, they've hired Heyman because they're doing public sector bargaining. Heyman was a cabinet minister. He's close with the Premier. He also used to be the head of the BCGEU. So he is, I think, a really good person for this job. And the government's in a tough spot because of the fiscal situation that we've talked about a lot. Basically, they're going to have to saying no, I think, to the unions. And they need someone that the unions trust to help them through that process without minimizing disruption to services, basically. So I think in this case, it's a good one to have, potentially, assuming Heyman can deliver with his qualifications. But I think the problem is the overuse and the failure to deliver on other files. It sort of ends up kind of eroding trust and making it difficult to actually, have the trust in special advisors and consultants when you really need them. And so they need to be really well chosen when you do choose to have them.
It does seem, given that history, like it's a sensitive time to be doing this. We were talking about Michael Bryant, the special advisor in the downtown east side, just a few weeks ago, that had his 6-month, $150,000 contract canceled by the Premier because of the backlash over how it looked, how it was handled. And I think more than anything else, to Jillian's point here, that 2 years had gone by from the Premier promising to do something on the downtown east side, and then hiring the advisor just didn't connect, Allie. That circle didn't quite work. But maybe it works on George Heyman because of his background and the fact it looks like a short-term appointment. I don't know. What do you think?
I think all of the things that Jillian mentioned about Heyman's CV are absolutely spot on as to why they were smart to hire someone like him. That's not the issue. I take a more controversial take in creating some drama between the NDP, and I found this odd because in my observation, it looks like they had to hire a veteran and someone who kind of knows what he's doing, because there's not this trust with rookie MLAs. right? I mean, like there's still like a somewhat new caucus with a lot of new voices, and it just seems that the brand of the NDP needed to bring in some big guns in order to become a little bit more reputable, and that's what I think is happening here. So it's a shame that the NDP aren't giving these opportunities to new people and rather bringing in some veterans, obviously for some really great reasons that Jillian mentioned, but we're not being very forward thinking in that.
Mm-hmm. What about well, Jeff, let me just ask you about Heyman, and then we'll kind of put it in a broader context and go around again. What do you think of this hire?
Well, I think it's George Heyman has one job as an advisor, a clear scope, relevant experience, as folks talked about here. Let's put this in the context that public sector bargaining is a huge, absolutely critical undertaking for government. Minister Heyman's been on the other side of the negotiating table, working with unions to try and get the best deal that they can from the government. The government's got no money, and they're going to have tough negotiations. And Heyman's well suited to assist the government in that respect. I'd also point out that Jennifer Whiteside in Labor is a very competent former Labor leader at all. With many cabinet ministers, it's just a matter of every day as a fire hose, and you're trying to keep up. And having one person like Mr. Heyman assisting at what sounds like a defensible rate of pay is good. If I have one concern, it's about the quiet approach of the announcement. Announcing someone's new job on LinkedIn is suboptimal, and I think there's a bit of a pattern here of announcing 2 months into the person being in that role. And so my advice to the Premier's office on this: if you've got a good candidate and the work is defensible, then announce it right at the start so there's full transparency and everyone knows what's going on, and there's none of this.
And it's only fair to them, too. It sets them up for success if you're more transparent about it. You don't kneecap them like it's some big secret a couple months later where they have to come out and dig themselves out of a hole that they've been put in for whatever reason. Is it a political problem? You have, I think, 7, depending on how you define them, special advisors in the last 3 years. Some of them continue on. Doug White on Indigenous Relations, I think he's earning $250,000 a year as a special advisor. Some, like former Victoria Mayor Lisa Helps on housing, they go on to get installed in other government positions. And then this week, Global BC reporting that Dr. Daniel Vigo, the special advisor / chief policymaker on involuntary care, is earning $1 million a year in that role, although government says he might use some of it to pay for staff and other expenses. So does it begin to become a harder sell the more often it's used, Jillian, and the money that is attached to it coming at a time when the government's also saying we got to count our pennies, we got to roll back costs, we got to put a hiring freeze on, but also we have this money, and a lot of money in some cases, to hire outside people to jobs that your first reaction might be, is there no one in the 400,000 person public service that can do that? Does it become a harder public sell, I guess?
Yeah, I think that's it. I think it's the overuse of it. And when you've got a cabinet that's making extra money, every single NDP MLA is making a top up. And when you look at the public sector salaries, it's the political appointees whose salaries have been continuing to go up recently. So I think that is exactly the problem. And again, with little to say specifically like on housing, what was accomplished, when you've got, the Premier's office driving that file as well as a capable housing minister. So I think and like I said before, I think it kind of dilutes the effectiveness of using a special advisor or a consultant when you really need it and when it really is justified.
And it's also harder maybe for the public to track, Jeff. You have a special advisor like Dr. Penny Ballum, brought in various roles over the last 5 years, contracting $1.8 million, then given a job as the new interim CEO of the Provincial Health Services Authority, but also somehow finding a way to become back the special advisor of the Minister of Health. And the public is looking at it and going, are we not paying you $350,000 a year to do this job? How can you be a special advisor over here. It gets a little bit messy sometimes with these special advisors as their roles are difficult to track, perhaps.
Yeah, I think every special advisor hiring should be reviewed and scrutinized on its own merit. I think if you're going to set up people for success, and I think you see it with Doug White, I think you see it with Dr. Daniel Vigo, you're transparent about their appointment, there's a clear scope of work, there's full transparency about the work in a report, and that's how you can get public confidence in it. Dr. Ballum, who we've talked about before on this show, has a lot of experience, a lot of skill. She's city manager, City of Vancouver, deputy minister of health, led the COVID vaccination effort. A lot of skill there. But here the government is not being transparent, and it's not one clear scope, one clear job for the person. So people put up their hands and say, well, I thought that the PHSA, the health authority job was a full-time job, and that's what the pay is. But now you're focused on this green NDP community health center review. You're still doing all sorts of. You're still a special advisor in government. So there is concern out there, and I think it's warranted. And I think the Premier's office and the government should have been more transparent.
Is it still tenable at this point? Seemingly with every special advisor becoming a kind of critical story for the government.
The easy swing and criticism here is that the NDP government's just hiring their friends, and that's not a good look, no matter what the size of the paycheck is. The other is, how long is this really going to last? I think the longer we go, the more that taxpayers are going to want to know, how did you fix it? And it doesn't matter what's in a very well-written, researched report of different tactics that we could do in order to fix the issues. People are going to want to know, how did that person fix it? And, it's a practically impossible ask, but that is what voters demand. And I think that's going to be one of the issues as this continues to come up. That'll be the question closer to the next election of, are we willing to spend more taxpayer dollars on things that don't result in action that will fix healthcare and fix the downtown east side?
Thank you to the panel for being here. Thank you for watching. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast for additional discussion, and we'll be back next week with all the latest in BC politics here on Political Capital. Political Capital is brought to you by Uber Canada. Learn how Uber and Mad Canada are reducing impaired driving at uber.com/homesoon.